John walks into the office holding Annie's favorite flowers to find her. Unexpectedly, he overhears a conversation between his first love, Lena, and Annie. He is surprised to discover that Annie's true love is Henry, Lena's husband. Initially bankrupt, John sought help from Lena, who ended up marrying Henry. At his most vulnerable moment, Annie proposes to him, willing to marry him with all her possessions. Heartbroken, John accidentally shatters the vase. Worried about being discovered by Annie, he hastily leaves the scene. John is painfully recalling past memories when Annie arrives. Faced with the caring Annie, John is filled with pain. He feels that the current Annie is hypocritical, but still helps her to the bedroom to rest. In the late night, John's phone receives a provocative message from Henry, revealing that Annie was the one who caused the death of John's dog. These revelations cut deep into John's heart like a sharp blade. Ultimately, he decides to arrange for an end-of-life service. The next morning, Annie is surprised to receive a phone call informing her that the end-of-life service requires signatures from both spouses to take effect. John reassures her that it's just a prank. The party has just begun, and John notices Henry and Annie walking together as soon as he arrives at the bar. They are chatting about past memories, looking very close. The other friends at the party think they make a great couple. When Henry tries to kiss Annie, she notices John and quickly explains. Henry provocatively puts his arm around Annie in front of John, but John doesn't get angry. He simply has Annie sign an intent form. Annie leaves to get a gift for John, and Henry takes the opportunity to disclose how Annie caused John's father to go bankrupt. John angrily grabs Henry's collar. Noticing Annie's return, Henry deliberately smashes a beer bottle against his own head and then shifts the blame to John. Despite John's attempts to explain, Henry puts on an innocent act, angering Annie, who slaps John. John refuses to admit guilt, and in her anger, Annie picks up a bottle from the table and hurls it at John's head. Disappointed, John realizes that in Annie's heart, Henry is the priority. With blood running down his face, John looks at Annie but receives no sympathy. Henry pretends to feel dizzy, and Annie compassionately helps him to the hospital, choosing to ignore the fallen death service agreement on the floor. Before leaving, Henry provocatively glances at John. John, feeling down, reminisces about the past while burning mementos associated with Annie. Just then he receives a call from Annie. But she is swayed by Henry's feigned headache, winning her concern. Annie asks the doctor to look after John, promising a monetary reward, all of which John on the other end of the phone hears. She comforts John, assuring him that she will definitely come home to be with him. John waits all night without treating his wound. He looks at the evidence in his hand, ultimately losing trust in Annie. Annie takes care of the injured Henry all night, unexpectedly seeing Henry's blood type, realizing that Henry may not be her true lifesaver. She contacts her assistant to investigate the truth of what happened in the past. John attends the press conference hoping to meet Annie, but unexpectedly witnesses an intimate moment between Annie and Henry. Meanwhile, to make Henry happy, Annie plans to transfer 51% of her company's shares to him. Reflecting on the time she offered company shares to John, who declined, Annie understands that John is not after her wealth. In contrast, Henry eagerly scrutinizes the share transfer agreement and collaboration contract. Unable to bear the heartbreak, John seeks out Annie's assistant, leaves behind the evidence he has gathered along with the death notification and quietly departs. On the other hand, John has already accepted the death service and passed away. At the press conference, Henry loudly announces that he has acquired 51% of Annie's company shares. Looking at the vanity-driven Henry, Annie feels somewhat estranged. It is then that she realizes that John was actually her lifesaver all those years ago. Suddenly, the staff responsible for the death service appear with John's body and inform Annie of his passing. Annie does not believe the fact that John has left, but the staff show her the death certificate. She pushes away Henry's support and tries to call John, but no one answers. The words of the staff make Annie understand that the death service agreement she signed that night at the bar was for John. It was her lack of attention towards John that caused her to overlook the contents of the agreement. Annie sits regretfully beside the coffin, rejecting her assistant's attempt to help her in grief. Henry remains stubborn, claiming that John orchestrated the whole thing. Witnessing this, Annie's assistant hands her the evidence of bankruptcy and the death notification left by John, making her realize that John overheard her conversation with Lena that day. She is filled with regret, but it is already too late. Henry pretends to help Annie up, insisting that John's death is a hoax. He tries to open the coffin but is pushed away by Annie. Annie exposes his lie about being her savior in the past, asking him not to touch John's coffin, which makes Henry feel guilty. However, Henry is still determined to open the coffin. He pushes aside the obstructing staff and confidently opens the coffin. To everyone's surprise, John is indeed lying inside the coffin. Seeing John in the coffin, Henry is scared and falls to the ground. Despite Annie's reluctance to believe this fact, John in the coffin and the death certificate make her have no choice but to believe. In the end, she is stunned by the news of John's passing. In the hospital, Annie suddenly wakes up from a nightmare, crying as she mentions dreaming of John's passing. However, the assistant informs her that it is real. She refuses to accept reality and runs out onto the street frantically searching for a figure resembling John, but is misunderstood as being crazy. In a blurry state, she seems to catch a glimpse of John's figure, even rushing onto the road. A driver initially intends to scold her but, seeing her holding a memento, quickly retreats in fear. She walks back home like a lost soul, looking around at the familiar surroundings, constantly recalling the wonderful times with John, though these beautiful memories have now become the past. Unaware, caring John has deeply embedded himself in her heart, providing her with much happiness and love. It's only when John departs that she realizes the precious significance of John to her. However, her realization comes too late, and the harm she has caused John is irreparable. Suddenly, she discovers the watch she once gave to John in the trash bin. After finding John's phone, she also uncovers Henry's ongoing provocations towards John. Feeling extremely angry about this, she immediately informs her assistant to retract the decision of granting Henry shares. Meanwhile, upon learning this news, Henry is furious. He doesn't understand why Annie's attitude towards him has abruptly changed. So he disregards Lena's attempts to stop him and rushes straight to Annie's home to find her. Henry pretends to care for Annie, but she pushes him away, causing him to fall to the ground. Annie reveals the truth she has discovered. When she wakes up after being rescued from the accident, she only sees Henry by her side, leading her to mistakenly believe that Henry is the one who saved her life by donating blood. Henry doesn't explain but takes advantage of the situation to claim credit for John's actions. This is why Annie has been indulging Henry for years, favoring him and even betraying John's care and love. Henry tries to make excuses, but Annie interrupts him by producing the blood donation form. Faced with the evidence, Henry still denies and tears the document into pieces. Annie immediately shows the surveillance video of John donating blood at the hospital. Realizing his fault, Henry guiltily throws away the phone. Annie is furious and slaps Henry repeatedly. Henry finds it unbelievable because Annie has always been very gentle with him. However, Annie, now knowing the truth, is extremely angry and vows to not go easy on Henry in the future. She then dismisses Henry. After Henry leaves, he also feels equally furious. In fact, John has not actually passed away, but has moved to another city where he has started a new career as a renowned AI engineer under a fresh identity. Recalling the time when he was preparing to face death, he only then discovered that the death service was simply a staged death plan, allowing him to start life anew. Following his staged death, he acquired a brand new identity and embarked on a completely different life. Sophia, his college classmate and current CEO of the company he works for, expresses admiration and fondness for him. However, John, deeply hurt by Annie, is not interested in entering into a new romantic relationship. Henry sits at home feeling down as he drinks, but unexpectedly sees John being interviewed on TV. He realizes that John has not really passed away. Excited, he immediately calls Annie to expose John's deception. But Annie is thrilled and instructs her assistant to find out where John is. Annie rushes to John's workplace but is stopped by the security guard at the company entrance. Annie claims to be John's wife, but the security guard mistakes her for an overzealous pursuer and blocks her way. Annie falls to the ground and is told she needs to queue up to see John. At that moment, John and Sophia arrive. Sophia calmly takes John's hand and they enter the building. Annie notices John's arrival and excitedly grabs his hand, only to be met with indifference. Discovering Sophia's presence, Annie suspects John left because of a new relationship and angrily slaps John. Confronted by Annie's accusations, John retaliates in anger. Henry arrives, helps Annie up, but she deeply resents Henry and pushes his hand away. John decides not to engage with Annie and decisively turns and walks away. Annie is trying to catch up with John, but she is stopped and falls again. To make it up to John, Annie calls her assistant, asking them to prepare stock transfers. This makes Henry standing nearby full of jealousy. At the awards ceremony, John is honored with the Outstanding Talent Award, receiving praises from the entire audience. John happily walks onto the stage and accepts his well-deserved honor. Sophia also feels genuinely happy and proud of John's success. Annie watches as John shines on stage, recalling memories of their past together. Meanwhile, Henry, witnessing John's acclaim, feels jealous and secretly plots against him. Annie is determined to repent, holding John's favorite flowers as she walks towards the stage. She openly expresses her guilt towards John, surprising the onlookers. However, John, without mercy, angrily throws away the bouquet Annie offers, stating that he will never forgive her. He reveals the pain he has endured, accusing Annie of causing the bankruptcy of John's family and leading to his father's death. Over the years, Annie has ignored John's feelings to please Henry, focusing only on Henry's needs. Even their marriage was for Henry's benefit, allowing him to marry Lena, John's former fiancée. John feels saddened by all that Annie has done over the years. He has long given up on Annie and pays no attention to her repentance. Annie tries to showcase the kindness John had shown her in the past, hoping to evoke memories of happier times. However, to John, it seems like his efforts have been one-sided all these years. He has not felt Annie's love, only betrayal and deceit. At this moment, Annie's assistant delivers the items she requested. Annie attempts to make amends with John by offering a mansion, a luxury car and company shares, which are the very items Henry used to provoke John in the past. However, these symbols of wealth are nothing but illusions to John. The John who once deeply loved Annie does not desire these riches. Now, the disillusioned John has no interest in Annie's money. He takes the property Annie offers, casually tossing it into the air. Sophia witnesses this scene and walks towards the stage, feeling angry for Annie's action. Sophia exposes Annie's selfish behavior, pointing out how Annie has confined John at home in the name of love, disregarding John's abilities, which leaves Annie feeling ashamed. After Sophia finishes speaking, she signals the host to continue with the award ceremony. At the same time, the malicious Henry approaches Annie, pretending to help her win back John's heart, but in reality he is plotting a larger scheme. Annie is unaware of Henry's scheme and instead feels somewhat happy about Henry's help. At this moment, a journalist steps forward to expose John's achievements as plagiarized rather than original. However, all of this is a meticulously planned slander by Henry. The journalist accusing John holds evidence and steps onto the stage, but refuses to present it under the pretext of safeguarding its security, hoping to hand it directly to the relevant authorities. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, people are suspicious of John's technology. The journalist insists on leaving the scene to report to the regulatory authorities. Meanwhile, Sophia demands the journalist to show the evidence. Henry hastily leaves to avoid exposure. John is unafraid of inspection by the regulatory authorities because he has already guessed the mastermind behind the scenes. Confidently, he lets the journalist leave. And he tells the audience that he is not afraid of any doubts, demonstrating his trust in his own technology and earning applause from the audience. In an effort to win John's trust, Annie exposes Henry's scheme and offers to help him, but John remains unmoved, leaving with Sophia. Since John was falsely accused, there has been an overwhelming amount of online abuse towards him. Sophia feels somewhat worried about this, but John displays confidence and plans to retaliate against Henry. Meanwhile, while thanking the journalist who exposed John at the award ceremony, Henry generously rewards her with a large sum of cash. Just as Henry is pleased about this, he receives a call from Annie. Annie angrily declares that Henry will pay the price, and despite Henry's attempts to explain, Annie no longer pays him any attention. Suddenly, he receives a call from his father, feeling proud, thinking it's his father's praise, only to learn about the family's bankruptcy. Harming others ultimately harms oneself, deepening his hatred towards John. On another front, Lena's assistant has found the real culprit who harmed Lena's father in the past. Back then, Lena was deceived by Henry, mistakenly believing that it was John who reported her family, leading to her father falling seriously ill. However, all of this was actually part of Henry's scheme. Lena receives a call from Annie and they are surprised to discover that Henry's family has gone bankrupt due to John's retaliatory actions. They are astonished by John's current power and are filled with remorse. Journalists gather outside John's company building, and at the same time, John and Sophia also appear on the scene. The journalist's questions trigger Sophia's anger, and she fearlessly slaps a journalist, firmly defending John's innocence. John feels happy because Sophia always believes in him wholeheartedly. As they prepare to leave, Annie steps forward, claiming to have evidence that proves John did not cheat. She promises to provide all the evidence if John returns to her. John dismisses this while jealous Henry watches everything from the crowd. Annie tries to hold on but is interrupted by Sophia. Annie shows their marriage certificate, attempting to express her true feelings, but for John, this is only a painful memory. He does not want to recall past betrayals and pain, he simply wants to end all ties with Annie. At this moment, Lena rushes to the scene. Sophia and John mistakenly believe Lena has come to speak on Henry's behalf, and they are about to call security to pull her away, but Lena declares that she will divorce Henry. Henry quickly pushes through the crowd, pleading with Lena not to leave him. Lena points out that he once framed John, deceived her and made her believe John was responsible for harming her father. Henry tries to explain but is met with a slap from Lena, accusing him of deceit. Angry and having lost everything, Henry angrily blames John for everything. He envies John for winning everyone's love and trust and angrily pulls out a knife to stab John. In a critical moment, Annie bravely blocks the knife for John. Controlled by security, Henry is amazed by Annie's bravery. For the present Annie, John's safety is more important than his forgiveness. Fortunately, the journalist voluntarily surrenders. The deeply sinful Henry will also receive the legal punishment. All the clouds have dispersed, and John finally accepts Sophia's love. Sophia, who has never set foot in the kitchen, surprisingly learns to cook for John and prepares a lavish dinner for him. Sophia embraces John, showing how important he is to her, willing to go to great lengths to make him happy. Reflecting on his past interactions with Annie, he used to unilaterally provide for Annie by preparing meals. Now, with Sophia wholeheartedly devoted to him, John feels happiness. He sweetly kisses Sophia, and Sophia in turn has successfully gained John's trust and sincerity. They have ultimately found the happiness that belongs to them.